Hello and welcome to the Heat Check Podcast, Miami Herald's Miami Heat Podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's going on?
Nothing much, David. Just ready to get to Orlando, make the 3.5 hour drive. It is the one NBA trip I could just drive for.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of. Do you like that?
it's different. I like it.
You
but
can take the
also,
bright line. You could have taken the
yeah,
bright
I could.
line.
I thought about that actually, but I'm scared to do it for the first time because I don't know what it's like.
Yeah,
But
and you don't want it
so
to
I'm
hit
driving.
someone while you're on it.
Yeah, that too. The only downside of driving is just it's less efficient because it can't work for those 3.5 hours.
Right, that's true.
You know us. You know, in your former life, David, as a
Yeah,
sports reporter,
those
full-time
trips,
sports reporter.
those trips were valuable time to get work done.
Yeah, we're always working, so 3.5 hours without work, it's kind of scary. But no, it should be fine.
Yeah, it'll be another interesting game for the Heat, as we talked about last week. A telling stretch of the schedule, I think, coming up for them between now and Christmas, and it started on Monday night with a home game against Minnesota. That dominant kind of offensive first half for the Heat. Obviously, though, it came down to the fourth quarter, and Miami loses a tight one to the Timberwolves, the top team in the Western Conference. The big storyline, I guess, for the most part, other than the fourth quarter stuff, which we will, of course, talk about because we can't not talk about it with this team, is the return of Bam and Tyler Hero. I guess let's start with the good before we get into the bad, because those two guys coming back, obviously Minnesota's a really good team. I think, as we have said a bunch of times, like, they just got to prove they can beat one of these good teams. They obviously did not do that last night, but, the Minnesota, I think at this point it's hard not to believe that they're for real, right? At this point in the season, the way that Anthony Edwards is playing and the fact that they've kind of figured out their two big man thing. And the Heat obviously, go toe to toe with them, come out on the short end in the end. But starting with Tyler and Bam getting back, what did you make of their returns and what they did for the Heat on Monday night?
I mean, the positive is they returned and they looked like themselves. They looked healthy. Both played over 30 minutes. Tyler scored 17 points in the first half. He ended with 25. So second half, he kind of slowed down a little bit. He said his wind was still a little bit, obviously his first game back in over a month, that his wind was, not there yet, but he looked in rhythm, which is a good sign. Should be able to get back once he gets his wind and his legs under him. He should get back to 100% full form. And Bam, 22 points on 22 shots, not super efficient, but he played 36 minutes. He said after the game that he came away unscathed, so it was a good night. He felt healthy. He didn't feel like the hip was bothering him as much as it did a few weeks ago. Only had 6 rebounds, did have 6 assists, but again, it was going against arguably the best defensive player in the league right now, at least in the regular season, Rudy Gobert. So I think Rudy's length kind of bothered him, but still 22 points on 22 shots, played 36 minutes. Those are two good things for the Heat, that those two guys looked healthy and that they're back, because yes, the Heat were winning some games without them, especially without Tyler, but against good teams like Minnesota, you're going to need those two guys to play big minutes, because they're two of your 3 best players. Bam has arguably been your best player this season.
Yeah.
So it is important for those guys to be healthy, and that's a positive sign for this team.
Yeah, Gobert was, I thought, pretty dominant down the stretch, but Bam, stayed aggressive, which is obviously a big topic we've talked about. Did not shy away from going at Gobert for good and for ill. He hit some important shots also, but I mean, Bam and Tyler were they your 2 best guys last night? Like that's pretty. Jimmy was kind of uncharacteristically quiet. Still efficient, but only 12 shots, 15 points. Like not.
Scoreless in the fourth quarter, which
scoreless in the fourth quarter. Not, again, like how often is that going to happen? That he's going to be your 3rd best guy on the floor, your 4th best guy on the floor. Duncan was good off the bench again. But I mean, those 2 guys, like, they make a big difference, right? If those 2 guys aren't out there and Jimmy, obviously those 2 guys aren't out there, Jimmy's not taking only 12 shots, he's taking 20 plus. but that game is competitive to the end in large part because of those two guys. And we saw, the offense in the first half was, I think they're statistically their best offensive half of the year, I want to say, or definitely one of them.
Definitely one of them, yeah.
That's you could see kind of the full complement there. More shoot. Tyler's shooting. I know it was only 1 of 6 from 3, but that helps. Just having another shooter out there, and Bam, obviously, you talk about, is he their best player? Like maybe not. Maybe it's Jimmy. He's certainly their most valuable just because of the upgrade that you get from. No disrespect to Thomas Bryant and Orlando Robinson, who have, been, I think, mostly done their job this year pretty well, especially with given all the time Bam has missed. But the upgrade from those guys to Bam is so astronomical compared to any other, I think, spot on the floor. And Bam, not his most efficient night offensively, but you just could see again just the way that him and Tyler, those are two really valuable offensive weapons. This team can score much better when those guys are out there, obviously.
Yeah, and it's just important for those guys to play because they need to. I mean, again,
what is this? How many games have they played? The three of them together?
Seven together in the first 27 games. And again, it's weird because they've played together now for like 3 or 4 years. So it shouldn't be like, oh, they need minutes together, but they do need minutes together because last playoff run, Tyler didn't play. And now Tyler and Bam are a little different. Like they take more shots. They're a bigger part of the offense. Jimmy has to adjust to that. Jimmy has to find his spots around those two guys. So it's a different dynamic now. Those two guys need as many minutes as possible together. That's why when people say, well, Tyler shouldn't start, he should play off the bench. No, the regular season is for working out the kinks.
Yes.
Those 3 guys need as many minutes as possible. And yes, they're going to stagger minutes. Supposing to do that with Jimmy and Tyler and even Bam and Jimmy. But start the games, to close games, those guys are going to be on the court together, and it's important that they get those reps.
What did you make of the way, again, because we said only 12 shots from Jimmy. It's not like, sometimes Jimmy has a game with 12 shots, but it's actually
15 free throws.
Yeah, exactly. Only 6 free throws. So that, that's only like 15 attempts basically from the floor. But what did you make of the way that he fit in with those two guys back? Do you think it was a struggle there, or just, Jimmy sometimes has those kind of games where he is a little bit more of a facilitator, a little bit more passive shooter? What did you make of the fit with the 3 of them for the first time in, what is it, the first time since October those guys all played?
Early November. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jimmy's a unique player where some games he'll be aggressive and go, like I said, go to the free throw line 17 times. Other games he'll take 8 shots and score 12 points. And with Bam and Tyler back, his usage rate's going to go down. There's no way around that. Mm-hmm. But you do need him to score points in the fourth quarter. You need him to take more than 1 shot. And that 1 shot that he took in the fourth quarter was a 3 in the final seconds.
Yeah.
To try to tie the game, I believe. And it was kind of an off-balance 3
Yep.
early in the shot clock. Questionable shot, but Spo didn't have a problem with it. So you need him to be more aggressive, especially down the stretch. There's no doubt about that. The one thing I'll say about Jimmy is we've seen flashes of Jimmy being Jimmy this season.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, he's a unique player where you can't say you can't make a final verdict on him early in the year because you know he's going to turn it on. And he's still going to turn it on. The question is, what is the ceiling of playoff Jimmy this season? Is it the same as last year, or is the ceiling not as high? His rim rate is down. His rim shooting percentage is way down, lowest it's been since he got to the Heat. He's not finishing as well. And as you know, David, that's usually the first sign of a guy aging. Again, I'm not saying Jimmy's getting is a regret. He's still, when he wants to be, the Heat's best player, but it is something to monitor because it's early on, but the advanced metrics say there has been a little bit of a dip. Still, again, the Heat's best player, but that is something definitely to monitor. And last night was kind of a continuation of that up and down season for him. He has 15 points on 12 shots. This team needs more from Jimmy. I think Jimmy would admit that. They need him to score in the fourth quarter. They need him to take more than 1 shot in the fourth quarter. That's clear. We know Jimmy's going to be there when it matters most down the stretch of the season in the playoffs. But to get to where this team wants to be in a good position entering the playoffs, he needs to do more consistently, even when Tyler and Bam are out there. they need to find a way to, maximize each other's skill sets. And that's what the regular season is for. They've only played 7 games together. So that's going to come as long as those 3 stay healthy.
Yeah, I think kind of the frustrating part, no, it's not frustrating, but like, because Jimmy changes so much come playoff time, this team is so hard to talk about sometimes in the regular season.
It is.
But like you said, I mean, and we've seen it before where last year kind of bucked that trend where in one year Jimmy expends so much in the playoffs, and then the following season, I think back to the bubble run, and then they followed it up. And obviously that was extremely unique circumstances. Yeah. But Jimmy was like not that good that year, and the team obviously flamed out in the first round of the playoffs in 21. He expended so much on those playoff runs. We saw it, last year or 2 years ago, they obviously did it to get to the East Finals, and then he obviously was able to kind of put together an even better playoff performance last season. But it was, how many games did he miss last regular season? Like 20 something. And, he's, we do know he tries to manage himself to get ready for the playoffs. But as you said, a lot of those numbers are kind of worse than they've ever been for him, or worse than they've been since he kind of blossomed into an all-star. So,
yeah. And like, even when he was quote unquote coasting last year, like his numbers were still
he was awesome.
And the advanced metrics,
best statistical season of his career, basically.
Right, and the advanced metrics still loved him. Like he was second in all the advanced metrics, pretty much to Jokic. This year, that's not the case. Again, advanced metrics can lie, but what I'm saying is it's a little bit different than the coasting of the last few years. Mm-hmm. He's less efficient. His finishing is not good this year. And he's getting to the rim less, which again, those are all things you have to monitor, because if Jimmy's not finishing as well, obviously he's not going to be as effective even in the playoffs. So that's I think it's early still, and again, Jimmy's very unique. Yeah. So let me tell everyone right now, I'm not saying that Jimmy has taken a step back, because I will not say that until we see it for a whole season. But it is something to monitor.
Let's get to the bad from last night, which I guess is the fourth quarter, and we'll kind of pivot us into just our broader topic here. I want to say the one thing you kind of feel from the fourth quarter last night, among a lot of things, but the one thing that really stood out is there's been a lot of talk this year about how the kind of small ball era is over, right? And the big ball era is here. And you felt that with that Timberwolves team last night. Their size, I thought, really, obviously, how many blocks did Gobert have down the stretch on Bam? At least 2, I think. You could feel that a little bit last night, and we'll see if that, I know obviously the team that won the championship last year, their best player is a center, and they've got some bigger guys. I'm still curious to see what this is going to look like in the playoffs with some of these really big teams. But certainly in the regular season, I know that's obviously a big part of the Wolves' identity. You felt that matchup problem, I think, for the Heat last night, which has been kind of an issue for them for years.
Yeah, they finished 4-14 from inside the paint in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
That's just, obviously, that's 28% from inside the paint. That's just not good enough, right? Especially when another team is shooting scores 35 points in the fourth quarter. Like you're gonna get dominated. And I'm surprised he even scored 20. The only reason that he even scored 25 points in the fourth quarter was because he went 4 of 10 on threes. Like they just made some tough shots just to stay alive and keep it close. Because if not, the Wolves would have pulled away and probably won by double digits. So yeah, I think that's why it's so hard to pinpoint one thing about like what's going wrong in the fourth quarter, because it's kind of different each game depending on the matchup, and it's like, why does this continue to happen? Even though it's like sometimes the offense, sometimes the defense, sometimes it's both. Sometimes a team just gets hot shooting threes, or sometimes the team has Anthony Edwards. Like last night, Anthony Edwards makes a bunch of difficult shots that you're like, okay, what are you going to do? He's just that good. Yeah. And they have Rudy Gobert on defense, and he's kind of making life tough on Bam and just kind of cutting off any attempts at the rim. So it's different every game. It's just it's happening too frequently for this team. They're second worst fourth quarter net rating. I think they've lost how many now by double digits? 8 or 9, I think. Last night they lost by 10 in the fourth quarter. They've lost 9 fourth quarters this season already by double digits. They've only played 27 games. That, again, it's a small sample, but that is alarming. I mean, you take away the fourth quarter, and they're probably a top 5 team in the NBA. They have a positive net rating in each of the first 3 quarters, and then in the fourth quarter, second worst net rating, like being outscored by 14 points per 100 possessions in the fourth quarter. Only the Suns have a worse fourth quarter net rating, which is kind of weird. The Suns are also supposed to be a good team. But yeah, it is alarming. It's the Heat's biggest issue right now. After last year was one of their biggest strengths. And I've asked players what's going on, and they can't even explain it. Like, they just say it's kind of more mental, which we've talked about, that they think because they enter the fourth quarter with a lead a lot of times, they kind of let their foot off the gas and play differently. I don't think that was the case against Minnesota. I don't
think it can be the case anymore. I think it's become, now it's such a running topic that like that can't be the answer anymore.
No. And is it the rotation? Is it Jimmy not playing for half the quarter? I think Jimmy entered last night's game like for the first time in the fourth quarter, like 4 minutes left, which is really late.
Yeah.
Later than usual. I don't know if it's because there wasn't a stoppage or what. But yeah, Jimmy entered with 4:51 left. Like, he missed the first 7 minutes of the fourth quarter. And again, he didn't score in the fourth quarter. So I don't know if it's like switching up the rotation. But then again, last year they were a good fourth quarter team, and Jimmy was missing the first half of the fourth quarter most nights. Like, we've talked about that last year, where Jimmy would enter like 6 minutes in, and they would be fine. So, and at some point you got to rest Jimmy. You can't have him play 24 second half minutes. So it is, again, it is something that it's hard to explain, but it's definitely something they need to fix. The one thing I would say, like the one thing I would point out is, as most things with this team, it comes down to injuries. They just haven't, because of all the injury issues, they haven't had a chance to find like a go-to fourth quarter lineup. Their most used fourth quarter lineup is Josh Richardson, Caleb Martin, Duncan Robinson, Jaime Jaquez, and Orlando Robinson. And they played 23 minutes together. Bam, Tyler, and Jimmy are not in that lineup. That shows you right there.
Not ideal.
Not ideal. They don't really have a go-to fourth quarter lineup right now. And again, you hope that this team can stay healthy for some type of stretch here, and they could find some stability down the stretch of games, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I think that is, when you talk about the way that they lose the fourth quarters, it feels like in a different way every night. That's the big thing. And that it's that sort of lack of consistency and lack of, I don't want to say like lack of identity, because I think this team kind of has like an identity, but they don't have that. I think we said it a couple weeks ago, like the fact that Jimmy's not out there, and they haven't had Tyler Hero out there for the most part, and they haven't had Bam out there. Like, they just don't have a go-to, like, everything breaks down, here's what we do. I think, they're not a good enough defensive team right now to just like put the clamps on teams. And with those lineups, they don't have enough of a offensive solution. And that lets other teams, like last night, like I said, the big thing that stood out was the Timberwolves size. That's an identity they have. And other teams are able to kind of impose their will and their identity, I think, on the Heat in fourth quarters, where the Heat are a team that their strength is in a lot of ways their versatility, their ability to win multiple styles of game. But so far this year, other teams are putting their stamp on these games in the fourth quarter. And the Heat, I think a big part of it is the guys that have been missing, the rotation. I don't want to say like Spo's doing bad rotation. He hasn't had a lot of options with the rotation because of those, 2 of your 3 best players have been out for a month. But I think that lack of continuity and that lack of, like, you're going to, because of the way the rotation works, they're going to give up a little bit of a lead to start fourth quarters, right? They're going to go in. That's the plan. Like, they know they're not going to be up by 8 in the fourth quarter, have a lineup of all bench guys. And the expectation is not that every night those guys are going to grow the lead. Like, they have to know that 8-point lead is going to shrink to 4 or whatever it is. But you need to then be able to throw something out that stops the bleeding right away. And they just don't have that right now because part of it is that Jimmy has regressed from what he was last year. And part of it is just they just don't have a lot of options out there offensively. There's Jaime Jaquez, raved a lot about him, but your fourth quarter you don't want your game to come down to like the number 17 pick having to be awesome in the fourth quarter as a rookie. Like you need your stars to deliver, and Jimmy for the most part just hasn't, because of a combination of he hasn't played a lot of fourth quarter minutes and some of, he's not playing like an all NBA guy right now. Tyler Hero hasn't been out there a lot, and neither has Bam. And we saw last night that like basically the reason the Heat lost was that the Wolves stars kind of dominated the Heat stars.
Play their stars. Yeah. And to your point, like for the last 2 weeks, they haven't had Bam or Tyler to eat up those minutes when Jimmy's on the bench for the first 6 minutes, right? Like at least now you have, okay, theoretically, Jimmy's not going to play the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter most nights, but you play Bam and Tyler, or Bam or Tyler, and you have a go-to guy that you can run your offense through. You have if Bam's out there, you have a guy who can anchor your defense, and you'll be okay. You could survive those, some of those minutes against some teams. But for the last 2 weeks, when you don't have those two guys and you just have Jimmy, and Jimmy's not there, this Heat team is deep, but there's a cap to the Heat's depth. Like you can't, like you said, you can't expect Josh Richardson and Jaime Jaquez and Duncan Robinson to win fourth quarter minutes against elite teams. You need your stars out there. So I think there's many reasons. There's a lot of different layers to it. It's just not that simple. Some of it is luck. Like teams are making really tough shots against the Heat. Cooper Moorhead from Heat.com has a stat out there that's like teams' expected field goal percentage in the fourth quarter against the Heat is like one of the best in the NBA. So that's part of it. But some of it is just like the Heat aren't playing well in fourth quarter. So I guess the bottom line is like for the Heat to be a better team, for the Heat to get to where it wants to get to, they need to find a solution. We don't know what that solution is because it seems like there's a lot of things going wrong and a lot of factors to it, but they can't be second worst fourth quarter team and expect to be a top 4 seed. That's just not going to happen. And you see that with the record. They're 15-12, I think 7th seed in the East right now.
Anthony, I feel like we've been talking about your fourth quarter story that's been in the works for
finally got it done.
Yeah, you finally got it up. Went up this morning before you hit the road to Orlando. Obviously, a lot of it is what we talked about, what we've been talking about for the last couple minutes here. But anything in particular just kind of stand out that maybe we haven't hit on just from kind of doing research for that?
Yeah, so hold on. The Heat, I thought this was like crazy. Maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but the Heat has already lost 6 games this season after entering the fourth quarter with a lead. It is a lot through 27 games. I think they have 12 losses. So 6 of those losses have come after they enter the fourth quarter with a lead. Last season, in 82 games, the Heat lost 5 games when entering the fourth quarter with a lead. So the Heat have already exceeded the amount of fourth quarter leads that they blew last season, which I think is kind of tells you everything you need to know right there. Like, if it wasn't for the fourth quarter, this team could probably be like 18-9 right now. Like they could, it's just those late game issues have really, really killed this team so far. And, again, it's still early. They haven't been healthy. We'll see if they can fix it. But it is their biggest issue at the moment. Now that they're healthy, because before it was injuries.
Right. Yeah. So that's a big part of it. When we talked last week about how this stretch is going to be really telling, one is just like they're finally playing good teams. But we also thought maybe they were going to start getting some of these stars back, so that these next couple of games here going into Christmas, and then the West Coast trip will be, as we said, like West Coast trips have not gone well for the Heat necessarily recently. So I'm not going to read too much into that one way or another.
They don't go well for most teams. Like,
they don't go well for most teams. Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Orlando on Wednesday and then Philly on Christmas Day. The tough part is that we got to see the Heat play pretty well against Minnesota for the most part on Monday, and they got all their guys back, and like that's exactly what we wanted to see for 3 quarters, and then the fourth quarter was like all the same issues just kind of reared their head again, and it felt again like the difference was just that I think a big part in the fourth quarter is the problems all year is that the Heat felt like they've been missing stars, and I think we could like justify that when 2 of their 3 best players were out. But last night it still felt like they were missing like that star power. And obviously they had guys back in the lineup.
Yeah. And we can end on this, but I wanted to point this out. And you talk about them now, the schedule is getting tougher, and it does get a lot tougher. I think entering last night was like 9 of the next 12 against winning teams, right? which is a very tough stretch, especially when you consider a West Coast trip is thrown in there.
Yeah.
The Heat are 4-9 against teams with winning records, 11-2 against teams with losing records. So they've done what they've needed to do against the teams they should beat, which again was a problem last year. So they've kind of solved that, but they're having a lot of issues against beating quality teams, which we've pointed out weeks before, and they're gonna have to find a way to get some wins over the next few weeks to kind of stay where they are, at least stay where they are right now. You don't want to fall under 500. I don't think this team will, but
it could. It could, because you head out west and if you lose 2 of the next 3 here, all of a sudden you're not in great spot to head on the West Coast trip.
Yeah, and at that point, you come back from the West Coast trip 35, 40 games into the season, you're around 500. That's not what this team wanted. It's kind of what this team was last year, but you don't want to repeat of last year. You don't want to be fighting for a spot in the playoffs, trying to get in through the play-in tournament. So that 4-9 against teams with winning records, not good, but they'll have a chance here to improve their record and prove that they can be good teams when they're healthy, as long as this team can stay healthy.
Yeah. Orlando on Wednesday will be another good test, because Orlando, road game, as we said, there'll probably be a good amount of Heat fans there, because there always are up in Orlando. But it's still if you win at Orlando, is that suddenly your best win of the year? Kind of might be for this team.
Orlando, 11-2 at home.
Yeah, so, really good. I mean, we said a bunch of times, their best win is they beat the Lakers at home. They still just lack that any sort of kind of signature victory. And again, that's not like they played close games for the most part against all these teams. Boston early in the year. There was a tight Milwaukee loss last month. Obviously Minnesota last night. But the difference between really good teams and just a playoff team is you win those games. And the Heat have just not been able to do that now. And so obviously we get Orlando on Wednesday, Philly on Christmas Day. We will come back after Christmas, I guess. Are you traveling out? Are you doing the whole West Coast trip?
Yes. Well, not the whole one. I'm missing the first 2 games. Okay. I'm joining the team in LA.
All right. So we'll have some time to we'll come back after Christmas, break down that Sixers game before the West Coast trip. And then it'll get interesting out the West. Those first 2 games are, when winnable. You look at the way, winnable, definitely. And none of those teams are playing incredibly well. Phoenix, as we mentioned, closes out that trip, and they've not played super well this year either. But so
Clippers are getting it together.
Clippers are getting it together. So basically, this stretch that I was mostly interested in, this 4-game stretch, the ones that were 3 home games and 1 at Orlando. But we're going to learn a lot about this team. I'm not going to be too frustrated if they go 1-4 or 2-3 on that trip, just because the West Coast trips are really tough. But a lot of opportunities here to show that you are a better team than you've maybe looked at times this year.
Yeah, and you kind of want to stack up at least a couple wins here before you go on that West Coast trip.
Because it could spiral. I mean, again, does it matter? Does your record at the 40-game mark matter that much? No, not really, but
they proved that last year. But
it
says something. You can't just draw back you can't just say, well, it happened last year, so they'll be fine. They can do it again. That was unprecedented. They were for one of the first teams to do what they did. So you can't bank on that again. We'll see if they can build some momentum here now. Now that they have their guys back, it does get tougher. But I think you and I still believe this is a good team.
Yeah.
When they're whole, they're a good team.
Yeah, for 3 quarters of every game, they look really good.
Exactly. It's just that 1 quarter that's it's a problem, as we've talked about for the last month now.
Yeah. All right, Anthony. Thanks as always for listening. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. Do you have anything new you're working on now, or you need to come up with a new topic to write about?
I'm done. Yeah, I'm done for the next couple of weeks. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
My 4th quarter story is out. I'm gonna work it now. I'll have a couple of things I'm working on, but obviously a lot of the coverage will be determined by what happens here the next couple of games. Because if they beat Orlando and beat Philly, all of a sudden next week you and I have a very different conversation than if they lose, 3 or 4 here, and lose to Orlando and Philly. So those games will dictate that.
Are you getting excited for that Christmas Day game?
Yeah, it should be a good game. I mean, Philly is obviously, I think, they're the top net rating in the NBA.
Yeah.
They lost last night, I believe, but still arguably the best team in the NBA right now. Embiid is playing awesome, probably the MVP at this point. And Maxi's a star. So yeah, that's gonna be another test for the Heat. That it's at home on Christmas, probably a good atmosphere at the arena that night.
Yeah.
Prime time. But if they can win that one, that would be their biggest win of the season by far.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you gonna go to Disney World?
I will not, unfortunately. No.
Rats.
If my daughters are going with me, maybe I would.
I was gonna say, yeah, you could have made a little trip.
But they have school still this week, so I can't.
Oh, really?
Can't do that. Yeah.
I guess that makes sense.
There's a last week of school.
Yeah. All right, you can follow me on Twitter at dbwilson2. I'll be covering signing day on Wednesday. Miami's bowl game coming up. Not going to New York, but there's a lot going on. Actually, a lot going on like the Christmas week in the Miami sports world.
Big Dolphins
no rest
game too
this year.
Yeah,
big Dolphins games. You got a lot going on. So just be sure to check out MiamiHerald.com for lots of great Miami sports coverage. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.